Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get Real with Jack and Cindy. I'm Cindy Morrison.
I'm Jack Wallace. Welcome back. So we've decided to go back to basics a little bit, and we've been covering a lot of subjects that are real estate, not real estate, agent directed. But one thing we really haven't talked about in a while is first-time home buyers, and when I say first-time home buyers, it doesn't necessarily mean you've never bought a house before. Which is also something you need to know. Whenever they say first-time home buyers, that's also not the definition for lending programs.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How did I not know that?
You can have owned a home before, but there's like a timeline of how long it's been. And so sometimes people think if they owned a house 10 years ago and sold it, but they haven't had one in 10 years, like let's say you moved to New York and rented for 10 years and have moved back. And it's been a certain amount, and I'm using that number. It may be different.
Oh, that makes sense.
But the lender will say, "Oh, you have not had a house for so long, so you qualify for the first-time home buyer program."
So not like you've just lived in the same house for a very long time. It's you have to have not been a homeowner for an amount of time.
Exactly. So it's whatever that caveat is.
You want me to Google that and see exactly what the timing is?
Because it's an interesting thing. Because I think people get caught up in that, like I have to have never owned a home before. You know, some people have go through a divorce and they spend 10 or 15 years renting and then decide to buy something and they don't realize they qualify for some really great programs for new home buyer.
Hold on. Now I'm asking ChatGPT. First time home buyer program. What about people who have owned a home before but have been renting for a period of time and can be considered, once again, a first time home buyer, period? What is that limit?
You're seeing how the sausage is made.
In Oklahoma. Okay, let's see what it comes up with. So somebody asked me, what's the difference between Google and ChatGPT? Google is going to
tell you where to look.
Tell you where to look. ChatGPT is going to give you the answers.
It's the Dewey Decimal System or it's the encyclopedia.
This is 3 years.
Yeah, it's not very long. I mean, it's kind of amazing. Yeah, so people get caught up in that.
I didn't know that.
The more you know, the more you learn. No, people get caught up in that, and it's really important because there's some really great programs for first-time home buyers, and I wish they wouldn't call it that. I wish there was a better way to put it because it sounds like first time ever home buyer, but
that's what I thought. But I haven't had a lot of people that have rented, but that's good to know.
And I think it's also, a lot of times people get divorced and they have to take, 3 or 4 years to get back into where they can afford something on their own. So that's a really, that's a common thing that happens with the divorce, or you relocate somewhere, you rent for a long time and then you go, I am going to stay here. So that's first of all, that program. Be careful when you think in terms of that.
That's really good to know.
Those words sound like it's one thing and it's actually something quite different. So first of all, that. But then the other side of it is, we've got generations of people. We've got the greatest wealth transfer coming from baby boomers to Gen Z and millennials, and so there's going to be a lot of younger to us. People, this is about everyone with me, but a lot of these people that are going to have money now to make some purchases, make some down payments, looking for,
and there are very few investments that are better than real estate. Own dirt.
It really is true. I mean, it's kind of crazy when I look at, we bought our house 16 years ago and it has almost doubled in value, and it's just a normal, we put a lot of, effort and money into it over the years, but nothing compared to the return. And my investments have not done the same thing. I mean, they've done fine, but not, to that degree.
We've more than doubled in 27 years.
The other thing that people don't always think about, and I wish that in some ways I wasn't such a nester, because the other thing that's really smart is it's one of the few investments that you can live in for 2 years. You can be for 2 years. And once you've met that and it's been your primary residence, then you can, up to a certain level, but it's a pretty high level, you don't have to pay taxes on the gain. And so it's like, so let's say you made $150,000 on your house in 2 or 3 years, which can happen with some houses. You don't have to pay any money on that. And the capital gains on that in an investment would be high. or the income tax. So it's really, if you're somebody who can do it and move every 2 or 3 years, I mean, within 10 years, you can have a house that's paid for pretty easily and not pay taxes on it, and then have that. So
smart strategy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really something to think about. And you do not, and this is huge for people that have lived this before, you do not have to reinvest that money. Used to, you got the tax break, but you had to put it back into another house within 2 years.
Right.
No more. You can
Really?
take that money and you can do whatever you want with it, and you never have to pay taxes on it.
So say that again.
So if I made $100,000, it's just for the sake of easiness. If I made $100,000 on my house, but I don't want to buy another house, I want to rent.
So you can qualify for the first-time home buyers in 3 years. No, I'm just kidding.
Could be. Yeah. So see where I'm going with this? No, that I can take the $100,000, I can put it in my bank account, and I cannot pay taxes on it because it was under the limit, and I don't have to reinvest it. And you used to have to reinvest it in something more expensive. So that's really an important thing that you remember. It used to be it was for the move up buyer, but it's no longer. That's not what it's for. So
I did not know that either.
I could be, somebody can challenge me on that, but that is what my understanding is of that.
Oh, so, that's great.
Yeah, because that used to really be hard because people at the end of their, like, let's say you're in retirement and you wanted to sell your house and move to a smaller house, and you had gained 150. Well, you didn't qualify because you were going to something lower in price. So a lot of people kept going up and up and up when they really didn't want to keep going up and up and up just to save that tax money. But then they ended up something that wasn't really practical for them. So yeah, it's also good because it frees people up from, we need more houses on the market for buyers. So yeah, so those are all kind of important things. But for a younger person, I know it's really difficult right now to buy a house for a younger person. It is really difficult. And some of the things that we talk about that we can never overstate it is you do not need 20% down to buy a house. The more you had to put down, that's great. I mean, I do think that's smart. And 3.5 is kind of the minimum to put down. And that's sometimes that's okay. As long as if you put 3.5 down and you have some money in reserve in case something goes wrong, because
you have to replace an air conditioner, et cetera, et cetera.
And you will have to, something you'll have to. And so that's a really important thing. And I think sometimes we under express. Is that a word? Under express
works for me.
We don't express enough to people that you need to be prepared that you are your own landlord. You can't make a call when the dishwasher breaks to have them come fix it for free. You got to make a call to Lowe's and get a new one and have it installed or get it fixed. So those are the kind of things you need to be prepared for as a first-time home buyer. So sometimes putting less money down and holding money, but actually holding that money,
not going on vacation.
Yeah, it's not Hawaii money. That is dishwasher money, or worst case scenario, roof money. So yeah, those are all really important things.
One of the things that I know, my son's in Dallas, and of course, real estate is silly expensive. Yeah. And he and I go back and forth. He's like, I understand the interest rate, but he said, the interest rate's killing me. And I'm like, but 6 to 7% is the market normalizing.
Yeah.
We may never see 2 and 3% again.
But they've never seen anything but.
Exactly. So he's like, well, I've seen this interest rate. But the other thing he said is how much more expensive the house is now versus what he would have been making then and what he's making now. And I get it.
And even relative to historical, for a while I was like, that's kind of bull, because they didn't earn as much as, the house was $30,000, but they earned $3,000 a year, or whatever they earn. But it has surpassed that now. I mean, it really has. And that's where we're going to have to come up with some practical solutions, because, it's amazing. And what is it? The age of the typical true first-time home buyer has jumped by 10 years, which is sad, because now you have to be in your late 30s till you can afford to get into a house. And that needs to come back down. I think we're going to have to figure answers. And we're going to have to start building smaller houses. We're going to have to start doing 1950s, like my house.
So that is the trend.
I live in 1,800 square feet very comfortably. You can do it.
I just listened to, just yesterday, somebody who's a guru in the housing market and what they're doing. And for so long it was build bigger, 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 bigger. And the last couple of years, we've seen a downturn on the size of the house. And he predicts the average house will be under 2,000 square feet in the coming years.
The only issue I have with that is that we're going to figure out how to use land better, because the reason why builders have to do that is because they have to pay for land, which has gotten so expensive that in order for the house to comp out, in order to make any kind of profit, the house has to be large enough to comp a price that pays for the land and for the house.
Which is one of the reasons why you see, like in Midtown, you'll see, a lot that's cleared, and then they build this giant 2-story McMansion, but they have to justify that they just spent $350,000 on the lot. And if they built a 1-story small house, they're not going to be making any money. They're going to be losing money.
But it's even when you go raw land in Bigsby or Jinx or whatever, the land costs a certain amount of money, the concrete for the streets, the sewers, the infrastructure, all that. I mean, all that adds up. Plus people want a pool and they want a playground. And so all those things cost money that has to come off the top and has to be incorporated in the price. So that parcel price gets very expensive and they have to cover it. Now, if you look at when you watch Netflix and you watch like in England where they live in houses that are all attached and they just go row after row. I mean, we may be getting more into situations like that where you have,
and that's what you see in Boston and New York and the big cities.
More row houses. We may have to get more into that, even in places like Oklahoma, to make it affordable, which I think is fine. I mean, I think we're seeing that downtown. We're seeing that happen, but and then also regenerating areas that have been less desirable and people moving there. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it all comes down. But I'm a believer in the American dream. And I think that we have to figure out how to make this work for younger people. I will say Oklahoma is still one of the most affordable places to own a home.
Tulsa in particular. And the suburbs and the outlying rural areas.
And it's a good quality of life. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of people that are coming here on these younger entrepreneurial programs, and they see that value. So I think
the average house price is under $250,000.
Yeah,
and that's doable.
Yeah, even I just read Bentonville, the average house price is $450,000.
What?
In Bentonville, Arkansas. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because and it worries me a little bit because Tulsa's sort of becoming a thriving destination.
We're over 1 million now,
and that's great. But it's also is that going to continue to make us less affordable for, and that's kind of the price to be paid for a lot of that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But with all that being said, I think the other thing too is this is where your mom and dad are coming in and talking to you. But I hear people a lot of times talking to me about how they can't afford a house as they're standing there with their Starbucks in their hand.
Yep.
Nothing against Starbucks, but if you really were to think about the small purchases you make over time and you were to make a conscious decision you wanted to save for 3.5% down on a house, it really wouldn't take very much time to get there if you really, really, really made that a priority. And maybe it's not a priority for you, and that's fine. But I think that's one thing that you can't just live exactly the way you want to live and be saving money. I don't get to either.
No.
I mean, I've had to give up a lot of things in order to just work towards retirement at some point in my life.
Wait, we get to retire?
No.
Actually, I say
I don't ever retire, but I'll definitely slow it down at some point.
I always say we get to sell real estate, but at some point, I'm sure.
Well, and I would say, I want to sell real estate when I'm much older because I want to, not because I have to.
Yes.
And I think that's the good plan for retirement. And I think we're all I think the whole world is sort of moving into that mindset of finding something you can do some, but not. I mean, I think when you lose your purpose, you kind of lose life for me too. So, but that's a whole off subject. So
rabbit hole.
Yeah, we're making it about us. But so the one thing I want to talk about is, getting with people like Cindy and I before you really are anywhere near ready to buy that first house can be a really good plan, because we can help you learn how to prioritize, maximize, and get in line so that you will be in a position so that you can buy a house, which means getting your your financing, getting savings up, getting a nest egg established, 401ks that you can show that you have some money in the bank, really figuring out where you want to live, how you want to live. Is that here? Because, the other thing too is when you decide to buy a house, you are committing to that area for a while because you're going to have to stay there. Like renting, you have 6 months or a year, right? The one thing is also a negative to me that people don't talk about, and I'm kind of tired of hearing this. A lot of realtors are going to be mad at me for saying this. Yes, you do lock in your payment when you buy a house for the long term to a degree. It does not mean that your payment is going to stay that number forever, because you have an increase in taxes, you have an increase in your homeowner's insurance.
And both of those have gone way up over the last couple of years.
They have. So
Not
for
gonna
me,
lie.
like I used to pay $1,200 or something, and now I pay $1,500 on mine. I mean, and so that's $300 over 15 years, but it's still an increase. So, if you're in an apartment, I think those increases can become much higher and much, and at their discretion. But it does not mean, I think there's a misnomer that with people who have never owned a home before, that my payment is going to be the same for 30 years. It is not. Your base payment, your principal and interest payment will be, but you're also going to pay a little bit more every year, aren't you? But it's going to be that, but your interest, your insurance and your taxes are going to go up, and taxes can really increase.
By a bunch, especially the more you paid for your house, the more
they're allowed 3% increase in value every year of your property value.
And our houses in Tulsa have been going up about 3% each year.
Yeah, but then they did that one recently where they allowed them to do an across the board bump up because it was such a big jump in value. So yeah, you got to be aware of that. So that's one thing I do think that we tend to say that, and it's true to a degree, but it isn't 100% true.
And remember, we as in real estate agents have a whole team. So if I'm working with a first-time buyer, let's just use my son for an example.
Okay.
How much he needs to put aside, how he's going to do that, whether he could use his 401k. There are a lot of questions there that I also will call in a lender for him to talk specifically about some of those things, because I know a lot about a lot of stuff. Some things when it comes to you paying for your house, I'm not going to know. So I'm going to call in the expert to help you and help you get everything set up for success.
Not to mention also, your son may not want to tell you everything.
Yeah, good point.
He might not, and I think that's fair.
And sometimes your clients, home buyers don't either.
You may not want to know everything either, because you really, want him to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. And, if you get mad at him because he's spending so much money on this or that, or, or maybe he didn't pay his taxes in time, or like whatever those things are, then a lender can kind of deal with you on that level. And it doesn't have to be us or, your realtor or your parents who know all that. So there's different reasons why we have different people who do different things. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to make it the best process for you and the best decision. The other thing too is, I bought my first house. We kind of bought it. My parents bought a lot of rental property, and it was kind of like a good deal in a good neighborhood, but we didn't do a lot of due diligence on it as far as like inspecting it and all, and it ended up being structurally a nightmare. Oh. And we put a lot of money, and my dad was a builder. But it just was one of those kind of like, this is in a great neighborhood and blah, blah, blah. And it just became, and I think we thought I would put a little bit of money into it and we'd just, sell it quickly, but I'm a nester. So I was there a long time. Well, I had to spend a whole lot of money getting it fixed up and getting, ready to go. And I did all that. And then I think they had more issues down the road, but it was like, so just getting in a house isn't always the best plan.
And remember that money. So there's going to be expenses you talked about if something goes wrong. It's also a good idea when you're looking at a house to ask how much the utility bills are. So you at least know what's going to come out every month.
Yes.
But also some of the best money you could spend is your inspection before, you basically put in your offer. then there's an inspection period. Please use that inspection period. And that is some of the best money you could spend.
Especially, I'm sorry.
But finding out what's wrong, especially if it's structurally.
And here's one of the biggest mistakes I think people are making right now. I see so many people that are flipping houses and people go, everything's new, I'm not going to worry about an inspection. That is probably the best time to have an inspection.
I have one of those right now. And they said, but everything's new. And I said, oh, we're still doing the inspection. The house has been there for a hot minute.
And you can have a new dishwasher, and you can have a new sink, and you can have a new countertop.
But there's also plumbing.
Yes, and electrical, and a lot of times the unsexy stuff they do not touch, and they didn't have it inspected, and they don't even know. It's not like they're trying to necessarily do anything bad. It's just they don't know. So I think I'm seeing a lot, or there's a lot of do-it-yourself flippers, which is fine. But that's exactly when you need someone to look and go, no, this was not done correctly.
Right.
And even in new construction, if it's a good reputable builder, I think you should have an inspection. And it's usually just what that does really is they just kind of get the warranty speed up. Like, you have a year of warranty. So it's a little less situation, I think, for that, if some people choose not to do that. And I understand that. But to me, like, you're not there every time whenever the plumber's there and the air conditioning guy's there and all that. So if something was just kind of missed or not put on, then it kind of catches those things. So the builder, it kind of makes it better for them, because then they can just get all that stuff done beforehand. They're not coming back and back and back. But when it comes to flippers, and, I think that's really exciting for a young, person that is buying a house, and they go, or, not so young person, they go, oh, it's all new and I don't have to worry about it, but it's in a great neighborhood and it's the right price. Okay, but spend the money to have it really looked at, really looked at. And I think
you will be happy you did, believe me.
I mean, even, maybe videotaping ducts and having them look at your sewer line. I mean, all those things that we don't necessarily always do, but it's like, you just don't know what the condition of that house was. They got it for a good deal in order to make the money.
Mm-hmm.
So that house probably wasn't well taken care of before they got it.
Right.
And what does that mean? What was neglected that should be looked at? So that's one, but that's also having a good realtor who guides you through this process is really, especially as a first-time home buyer. Oh my gosh, there's so many mistakes you can make.
And if you're working with a brand new agent, I think it's always awesome when they have a mentor that is going to be with them every step of the way, because there is a lot. And a real estate deal can go really great or it can go really wrong. And knowing that they have that help, or a broker that's, not holding their hand, but you know what I mean? I mean, they've gotten their license. They know their stuff. There's just a lot to real estate. So I always love it when a new agent has a mentor that can go with them. And
and I honestly think it should be sort of that way, as an apprenticeship kind of thing. But and I think with the way our company does it, kind of is. So,
yes, but I'm going with an agent tomorrow on her listing appointment.
Yeah, that's good. And but again, I do think there's a little bit of paralysis with the younger generation right now, that they're so afraid of making a mistake that they don't make any movements forward. And I don't mean that's a criticism. I think in many ways that's a positive, but I think I'm seeing a lot of hesitation to even make the first step and go, or they're so worried. Like, I've had a lot of some of them that have done a lot of things, and there weren't that many things that came back, but they were so freaked out by anything being wrong with the house that they didn't end up doing it. And then they never found a house. They let that one go, and it was actually the best house that they had found. So, there's going to be things that are wrong. That's just part of it. It's just how wrong and how fixable they are. And that's, again, having a professional that can say, this isn't that big of a deal, we can figure this out, or you should walk. That's a concerning issue. So, and there's some things that I wouldn't walk over that other people might. Like, there's things that I can go, you know what, I've dealt with that before, and I don't think that's a big deal, but for somebody else that is a huge deal. So
yeah, I'm curious how you handle structural engineers, because here's how I've done it in the past. If it's an area that I know generally has post-tension slabs and that kind of thing, and an inspector goes through it and doesn't see anything, then generally the client's good. If I know it's an area of town where the ground shifts a lot, or it's a much older house, I feel like that structural is really important.
I always tell people, that I explain what they are. I explain what the different inspections are. And I explain that a structural engineer is trained specifically for structure. And if you're really wanting a structural opinion on the house, that you should go with that. But you also have a good person who has been trained to look for cautionary signs. And so they could suggest that maybe we need to have a structural engineer look at it. And then I leave that decision completely up to them. Because I think that I think that practice I do that same practice across the board. Because I think that it really ultimately is up to them, the client. And if they're younger, newer, I probably suggest they spend more money and do more inspections than if they are somebody who's older and has some cash.
Yes.
Because I think that that sounds a little counterintuitive, right? Because I'm a younger couple, I don't have a lot of money, so I should be trying to save money on the purchase. No. If you're a younger couple who doesn't have a lot of money, you should be making sure you know as much about that house as you can know. And if you have to walk away and you spend $1,500 in inspections, that was the best $1,500 you will ever spend, even if you have to wait another 3 or 4 months until you can afford to do it again and find another house. Because $1,500 to not buy someone else's major problems is a great investment.
Could save you $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on down the road.
Or more. I mean, and so I think that that's where it's important to understand when there's not a whole lot that can go really, really wrong with a house. Like there's just not. I mean, there's a lot of little things that can go wrong. And everyone's definition of really wrong is different, but like catastrophic things are rare, but they exist. And they're not always obvious. And so I think that is really, and we also got into a period, let's be honest, we got into a period where everybody was doing houses without inspections or with inspections but no repairs because they were just trying to get the deal to happen.
The crazy stuff that happened in 2020 and 2021. Oh, I'll take it as is, And
then they didn't do any repairs or they didn't have any inspections, and now those houses have gone without any repairs. And they're coming back on the market. So I think it's even more important right now just because we used to go, well, that house was sold a year ago. I'm sure
it's fine. It's
fine. Like you kind of, but that you can't go by that anymore.
Yeah.
You really can't. So, but there's also, even like hydrostatic testing of the plumbing system can be a really smart idea because if they've had a collapse or something in the slab, you can drive yourself crazy. There's so many different inspections. You can literally drive yourself crazy. But I think every house, like if it's a house of a certain age, like I have a crawl space, for example, in my house, I would be less concerned about a hydrostatic test. And maybe a plumber's going to be upset with me for saying this, but I would have a less problem with that because of the fact that I could get under the house and repair anything that goes wrong. But if it's in my slab and something goes wrong, that's a bigger issue.
Right.
And it's under new flooring. And so like, that's where our expertise comes in. Okay, well, this particular house, you really do want to make sure that that's really inspected and we know it's okay.
A lot of times I think that's where it's great that if you look for an agent that specializes in that part of town.
Yeah, that is good.
Especially, like Midtown, if they're used to dealing with older homes or, South.
And let's face it, older
homes
are just getting older.
Yeah.
Like it's funny now because South Tulsa houses are the age that when I first started selling real estate, Midtown houses were. So what does that make Midtown houses?
My house was in 89 and it doesn't seem that old.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because my house, first one was built in 1918. And then we moved to new construction in 1959. It seems like new construction compared to all the stuff we would find in the 1918 house. But,
right.
And the misnomer that I'm going to buy a new house and I'm not going to have any of everything's going to be great. Cause it's all, there's one thing about older homes. You historically know it's there and it has not fallen off the hill, there's something historically great about knowing that. Where the new one, you don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, So, And especially like, if you have a brand new, like a builder nothing about, but you like the house, I would have a structural inspection on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, because I think, if it's someone who builds 2 or 3 houses a year, they may be great, but I would still feel better having somebody really check that out. So just kind of, I think always give your clients the knowledge of what's available. And also I suggest 2 or 3 companies and have them call them directly and ask questions and let the company explain what they do. But yeah, and it seems like that's becoming more the common thing. We have less structural engineers that do it. It used to be there were quite a few that did that, so it was kind of like just a part of the package. But now it seems like that is like a secondary inspection typically.
And I now put 10 business days in the inspection instead of 10 days, because if it does require a structural engineer, you're going to be waiting because there aren't that many. You may wait a week and a half.
Yeah, and you can't really, inspections are the responsibility of the buyer. So if you have somebody go in and they say that looks like it could be a structural problem, you should have a structural engineer look at it. That really isn't when you really aren't supposed to then go back to the seller and say, we would like you to have a structural engineer look at this. That's asking the seller to do an inspection.
Right.
And that really is on you to do that. I mean, as the buyer. So, but all of this relating to new home construction or new home buyers, we understand that it's scary. We understand that it's daunting, but it also is, if you want to have the greatest wealth in the long run, it is the number one way to do that. It's just, if you do it in the wrong way, it can be a quick road to not being great. So,
right.
If you really want to, the one thing about buying stock, like I do the stock trading where you're online and you just buy it and there's no fee and it's not through a brokerage, but I can sell that in a minute. You know what I mean? Like I can dump it and get rid of it. So like, let's say it starts sinking and I don't want to be on that ship, I can dump it. It's not the same with real estate.
Right.
I mean, when you buy it, you're locked for a while. You could turn around and put it right back on the market, but that does not mean you're going to sell it quickly. I mean, so, that's the one thing, you are locking in.
Well, and something that you made me think of, this is not for new home buyers, but if you have somebody that comes in and has a structural engineer look at the house, or you find out things that are wrong and the buyer backs out, the seller's going to need to disclose that if they now know about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I really think is sometimes not explained correctly by the listing broker to their client. And also, if you're a listing agent and you know that, there is something fundamentally wrong that now we know, and they're not updating the disclosure, you're in trouble because you have knowledge. And it's either that if you read the way that the law works, if you we don't have knowledge of when we ask somebody about the property and they tell us, we're taking their word for it. But once we've been told there's an issue, then we have a blurry line there that we have to deal with. It also gets blurry though, because that's one person's opinion. So like if one structural person says there's an issue, and then you have another person that comes in and they say, another structural engineer says, I don't think that's an issue, which I've had happen a lot.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a science, it's an art and a science, right? So then what does that mean for your disclosure? Because you've got one person. So what usually kind of happens, people go, oh, I was told it's okay, so I'm not going to deal with it.
I always tell them, if there's any question,
you got to put them both in. You got to say, one said this, but I also had this one who said this, and then they can do whatever they want with that information. So, because at the end of the day, it'd be better to be upfront about what you do know, and then them not be able to come back. Because if they come back on you and you had a structural person tell you that was a big problem, but you didn't disclose that, you're in trouble.
Yep.
So yeah, that's, and the other thing too is I think sellers really don't sometimes understand the impact, because when a house goes pending and it comes back on the market, what is the first question that we ask whenever we call?
What happened?
So, that's going to be, it's on the radar. So it's going to be a question and it will be answered. So I think it's just something.
I just got that question before we came on the podcast. Yeah.
And it's a fair question. Mm-hmm. It's a very fair question. And we're in a weird zone sometimes as agents, because again, sometimes people do that because they thought it was something was bad, but it wasn't. So, and you don't own the inspections that a buyer had.
Because you're used to, okay, so tell me if I'm wrong. Before I made it into the industry, I thought you couldn't automatically pass those on. Now there's a box where you can check.
You can, for information only, with the permission of the person who paid for it.
Okay. Yes.
And that it's still blurry, because that was a place in time when that happened. I mean, I always tell my sellers, when that happens, at least we have sort of an idea of what we may be facing, and we have some things that we maybe need to fix, and we have some idea, like that's kind of especially for a deal that blows, where it was nothing about inspections.
Right.
So
that's why I always put in there, at no fault of the seller, this property is back on the market.
Yeah. So, and that does happen quite a bit right now, because people end up doing it thinking they can get financing and they can't, or their house doesn't sell when they thought it was going to. No, but that inspection thing is a really interesting. I mean, I think it's got to be really spelled out, and it's fair. I've had people do that where they say, I just want to use those inspections. They were just done. And I feel comfortable that would be the company I would want to use. So that's fair. And then the other party agreed to it, but it's like, you just have to, as the broker, explain, okay, but you understand that this was for this moment in time. This is not for this moment in time.
Right.
Even if it was a day ago. So, because things happen in a day.
Yep.
I've had people move into a house, and the day that it closes, something goes wrong. Even whenever you sign,
the pool pump breaks.
Yeah, but even when you sign at closing, there's the whole caveat that if the house burns down before you sign, the insurance coverage is on the seller. If it burns down after someone signs, it's on the buyer. Well, that's in there for a reason, because that has happened.
Oh, can you imagine? Oh, yikes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean,
everything is in the contract for a reason.
Yeah.
Every time I have a buyer or seller question something, I'm like, I'm sure there's a story behind that.
Yeah. And, it's also interesting, because it's like, just having done this for so long, and there's just so many things, kind of like that whole, do you put one in? Do you put the other in if there's conflicting structural reports? And, I'll admit, through the years of 15 years, I've probably done it both ways, because it was kind of like, well, we got someone to say it wasn't a problem, so it's not a problem. Well, no, that's really, yes, that helps, because now, a licensed person is saying, I don't agree with that. But if a licensed person said it was, you kind of have to say, these are two opinions. Here you go. But that's just years of doing that. And also, we take ethics like all the time. I mean, it's kind of annoying how much they make us take ethics, but it's like, the one thing that's always so interesting is that you think the answer to a lot of things, and then you go, oh wow, no, that is not what I thought it was.
I learned something new at least every month.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there will be a new situation that I'm like, how did I not know that all this time? But I hadn't dealt with it.
Yeah. And I can't imagine being in a business where you didn't. I mean, I'm sure every business has a lot of that, but it's just like, in real estate, it's amazing how you just, and like,
it keeps you young though.
But we were talking about earlier, like, sometimes I go, am I learning this for the first time, or I just have not dealt with this for the first time, for a long time? Like, I'm sure that I've had this happen before, but it was so long ago, and we just dealt with it. And the other thing that's always funny too is, I always have to think now, whenever you're in the middle of a situation that is so stressful, and you just think, this is so awful. And then I think, remember that thing that happened 2 years ago? And then I think, I don't remember anything about it. I just remember it was a bad deal. And I think, okay, so this is going to pass.
It's like childbirth.
We're going to get through this. And it's going to pass. And then it will not be like this. But it's like, when you're in it, you're like, I can't live like this the rest of my life. You don't have to.
Yeah. Thank goodness. And it's for people who say, well, 3% or 2% or whatever they want. I'm just going to do this on my own. I mean, God bless you. But, real estate agent isn't isn't worth paying for. I'm just like, oh, if you only knew some of the deals that either an agent saved the deal, saved somebody money, got them through to closing by the hair of their chinny chin chin. I mean, there's a reason why there are professional real estate agents and we stay in business.
Well, I also find it interesting how people get caught up in that, and then whenever you find out what their salary is, mm-hmm. and they're making similar to what you make, and they don't. I mean, and they're not. I just find it interesting how somehow it's always. I'm learning more in time, and I'm bad about it too. Like when someone tells me how much I'm going to be up for, my first reaction is that's too much. I mean, like it's just like my knee jerk. I'm not spending that, and then I calm down and go, oh yeah, I am spending that. Mm-hmm. Like I think that some of that time, sometimes it comes across that way, and the reality is they just need a minute to absorb what that means.
Yes.
But I've had so many people through the years start out saying they didn't want to pay it, mm-hmm. and then they call me going, oh my God, please come help, or they get through it, and then they say the next time I'm calling you, and they do.
I have a whole guide and a whole book. Anybody who ever says, no, I'm just going to do FSBO, I'm like, here's everything. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to make sure that you know everything you need to do.
Well, the other thing, too, is transference of responsibility to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's something we kind of forget a little bit about in the money part of it. Like, I'm not saying that you're taking all of your liability off by having somebody else sell your house, but having a professional involved certainly means
does it every single day.
You're going to do the right forms. You're going to follow the right processes. You're going to be on track with the contract. Your disclosures are going to line up. Like, it's not just about me earning my income. It's about me being the person who keeps things so that you are above board, so that in 2 or 3 years, when they come back, you can go, no, we disclosed that, or no, you did not have that responsibility. Mm-hmm. But if they come back on you and it's just you and not me and my company that can say, we saved all the paperwork, we have everything that you need. I mean, there's a difference between somebody as a client who is fraudulent and does something, knowingly. There's nothing we can do about that if they do that, and we weren't a part of that. But no, I just think there's such it's a huge amount of money for people to do, and to think, oh, well, I'm just going to take it out on my own. It's like, okay, well, it can go really well for you, I guess, but it can come back on you in a way that you didn't expect to.
Yes, absolutely. Well, any other advice you would give to first-time home buyers?
We always get off subject, don't we?
I know.
Yeah, but so the most important thing for first-time home buyers is I do think we should do a Zoom. Like if people are interested, let us know, because I do think it'd be good for us to start even doing some Zooms with some people that are thinking about getting into mm-hmm. it, and really start talking about some of the plans you can make and some of the things you can do, steps you can take. I think it's overwhelming, and I think people just think, oh, I don't even know where to get started, so they just don't. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to listen to the media and go on Instagram and go on TikTok and hear how everything has gotten so much more expensive, and it has. We were discussing mm-hmm. that. We believe that's true. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It does not mean it's impossible. And if you wait until you're a whole lot older to get started, it's like, when is the best time to invest? Now. Mm-hmm. Yesterday.
And speaking of the media, I mean, I kept hearing all of these news stories. January was horrible. Home sales were way down, blah, 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 blah. We have to remember, we're getting those numbers after the fact. The market that we're in right now doesn't reflect what they're talking about happened in January.
Also, news is national now, not local. Mm-hmm. And Oklahoma has always been on a different path than the rest of the country when it comes to real estate. It just has, especially, we're like an oil driven. We've not so much now, but in the past we were oil driven. And so our economy would do well when other economies were sinking because of the price of oil. And then ours would go down when others were going up. So mm-hmm. we kind of have to be a little bit cautious of all that. The other thing too is hearing it's a good market or a bad market is kind of a misnomer, because having a bad market as a buyer
means opportunity.
Yeah. And so, if there's things going on that aren't great in the market for a buyer, that means that people have to start adjusting pricing and coming down to meet the demand.
Yep.
And so, that we are supply demand. That is how business works. That's how the economy works. And so if there's not any more demand because people can't afford houses and people have houses they have to sell, what are they going to do to get those houses sold?
Right.
They're going to bring them down. What are we going to do even with the economy, when the economy goes down, we talk about this all the time, but when the economy is having problems, then interest rates typically go down. Mm-hmm. And so if interest rates go down, then suddenly the market becomes, so you could have the house prices start to go a little bit down, the interest rates go a little bit down, and suddenly you can't afford to buy a house. Mm-hmm. So being ready to go is really important. Timing the market doesn't make a lot of sense, but there are times when it's just not your time to be in the market.
Right. And there are times where it sounds like a great idea and the opportunity is yours.
But being house poor is miserable. And, being in a house that you can't afford is miserable and you can't do anything else. So I don't suggest that. But my gosh, rents are so high. I mean, when I hear what apartments are going for, and there's so many of them, it blows my mind. So I do think
in Dallas, he can own a house for what he's paying in rent.
Right. And, it's also funny too, because even though I look at my friends who lived in bigger cities and I used to think, oh, I get to live here and it's so much more affordable. When you're buying property, that paid off for them. Mm-hmm. Because they had to bite the bullet and they had to pay for their house payment, and then they paid their houses off over time, and they suddenly have a whole lot more money invested in their house that they get to cash out in than I do, because our market was always kind of affordable and didn't bubble. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting too, like that the people that live in a bigger market and then they let that property go up and they can keep going up that ladder. Yep. And then they move to a market back, retire back to Tulsa or someplace like this. They have a whole lot more money that they got out of their property than we do. It's an interesting thing. So I think there's good and bad in both. I think you can get into a house more affordably here. You can live more affordably here. But if you're a mover and a shaker in a bigger city, you still should be getting into housing, because that is going to be your step. And then even I had a friend who would get transferred and would take the transfer. They would pay for commissions. They would pay for a lot of things, with this company. And then he would go from Dallas to New York, and he'd get an increase in pay in New York. He'd be there for 2 years, sell that house on their program, come back to Dallas, but he would keep his higher income even though he went back to Dallas.
Oh yeah.
And he retired much earlier, and he had all this, so there's just ways to play it with your money. But I think that with the house plan, getting in when you can is really smart. And
agreed.
Thinking that I think that we have too many people telling you it's unaffordable. And I think it's affordable for a lot more people, because I know how much some of you make. And you should be able to buy a house. There's something we're not doing right if you can't buy a house with what you're making.
Agreed.
And I may have to give some stuff up. That may be the case, but
may have to give up your Starbucks and a few vacations.
But trust me, you're going to wake up and be 60 years old. You don't think you are, but you're going to wake up and you're going to be 60 years old. And then you're going to think, wow, I have a lot of great Louis Vuitton belts, but I have zero money in my savings account if you're not careful. That is something we all have to be thinking. And I think all of us wish we could go back a few years and do some things differently. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to do it perfectly. You haven't done it perfectly, and that's okay. But it's never too late to get on course.
Yep.
Never too late to get on course. And one of the best ways to get on course is to at least have the goal of buying and owning a house, and do the process you have to start. Whether you do or not, at least you're going to have money. You're going to save something. So, but again, we'll set something up. I think that would be that's a good great plan. Idea. And just, we can do it by Zoom so people can just do it from home or whatever. But I think, even a community of some other people that you could say, hey, let's have an accountability to each other that, I'm not going to spend this amount of money this week on eating out, or I'm not going to go to the bar, or I'm not going to do a certain amount of things, and, set those expectations. The other thing, this is going to drive people crazy, but if you're on a Dave Ramsey plan, I respect that. And there's some people that need to be on the Dave Ramsey plan, because if you really can't control yourself and you need to get yourself in check, that's a great first step. But the problem I have with it is you don't build credit.
Oh, yeah.
You have to build credit. You have to have credit. And his plan is all about cash and not about credit. And unfortunately, I'm not saying I agree that this is the right thing for society, but that is all the banks have to go on when they're qualifying you, is whether or not you have credit. So be conscious of building your credit, getting a card and using it responsibly. Or now you can even do your rent where you do it in a way that builds your credit. There's different ways you can do that, but you have to have credit.
Marlo in medical school. I mean, we looked up, she graduated from college. She never had a credit card, had zero credit.
Yeah.
And, here she's got a few years she's going to be in school, but getting a credit card in her
and God
name
love her,
was
no
very
debt
important.
From that credit card, because they also give those kids credit cards and they just go crazy because that's criminal. I'm not saying that that's what you should do. I'm saying use it, pay it off, use it like what you would. You're still using cash basically, but just use the credit card and then pay it off every month. Then you're building credit. I I can't emphasize that enough, that you have to have credit because it takes years to build it.
Yes, it does.
I mean, and when you're asking them to let you buy a $300,000 or $400,000 house and you've got no credit history, they ain't gonna let you do it.
Right.
So we can discuss all that, but I think there's
good.
so many, and there's just a practical plan. It's so easy if you just sit down and start from the beginning. But the thing is, everybody needs to start a lot sooner than you think in the process, because it takes some time to get those roots down so that when it's time to buy the house, you're ready to go and you're in a great position. It's not something that just happens because you magically are ready. It's something you have to really be planning for and really be ready for. And let's face it, if you have kids or you want to have kids and you want to get in a certain school district and you want to, that is how you do it. It is how you do it. So this isn't just about, oh, I want to have a little bit more money. This is look at your life goals and where you want to be with yourself and with your family. And owning a house is the key to that in so many ways.
And you even mentioned a minute ago, Louis Vuitton bags or whatever. We got here and my Diet Dr. Pepper had exploded in my Louis.
I wasn't picking on you.
I'm not even sure if it's
I have some
salvageable.
designer
We'll
stuff
find
too.
out.
Yeah.
But if you own dirt real estate, that dirt's always there, and you have insurance on your home if something happens. Those are wealth building things, not stuff.
And again, I've said this before and I will say it again. I am not saying these things because I have done it right. I have been guilty of doing things wrong so much. It's taken me a long time to understand where I need to be.
But that's why you have the wisdom.
And so it is not in any way judgment. It is help.
Yes.
And depreciating assets are just they're not what you think. I think you have to be so careful because you think it's an asset, but if it's depreciating, it's not an asset for the long run.
Right. Agreed.
Even if it's not an appreciating asset. You can buy real estate and it not appreciate, but typically at least it stays pretty where at least you bought it.
Right.
So, and that's unusual.
All
and
right.
It should appreciate.
I think this was a good one.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it really, seriously, if you're somebody or you have kids, the other thing too, if you're a parent who has children, which is probably some of more what our friends would be and people that are interested in doing that, I really would love to do that. And I think it would be good for my soul and I think good for yours too, because we really are passionate about this. And I think that it's there's just so many kids now who feel defeated before they ever get started. And I don't agree with that. So,
agreed.
So we'll figure this out.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, everybody get real.
Get real.